Hello, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us today and joining Gwen to do a deep dive into Hungary today. As I'm sure many of you who've been on our little webinars before know, Gwen is our wonderful president of Exeter International and the absolute expert on this part of the world. Not to toot your horn, Gwen, but you are, let's be honest. So just a couple of little housekeeping reminders before I turn it over to Gwen. Today's presentation will be recorded, so if you do need to jump out for any particular reason or cut out early, take a phone call, the recording will be posted on our YouTube channel later today. You can also reference it at any point later in time. I will be here sort of lingering in the background. If you do have any questions, please feel free to use the chat feature and I will jump in and out as questions come up to prompt Gwen with those questions as she goes along. Alternatively, we'll open it up at the end for any live questions. So with that, Gwen, thanks so much for joining us today, and let's get going.
Great, thank you. As I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, but as Carissa mentioned, if you have questions, I'm completely fine to be interrupted. It doesn't like freak me out or anything. So interrupt at any time with any question you might have. And here we go with Hungary. For those of you that may or may not know, I've been at Exeter, gosh, a long time, since 2003. And my first trip with Exeter was actually a FAM when I was still an advisor to Prague and Budapest. And we went to Prague first and stayed at the Four Seasons. This is 2002. And then we went to Budapest and my thought was, oh, why did we even leave Prague? So since then, thank goodness, I've explored more of Hungary, more of Budapest, and this is really a destination that has come a long way. So just as a little precursor to what we're doing here, today the focus is on Hungary, Budapest, and the countryside. And really, this is a destination you should consider for wine, food, and history, and more. So we'll talk about all of that. Just so you get a mental image in the European map, here's Hungary down here, kind of to the right of Austria. And it is bordered by Austria, Slovakia, Romania, Ukraine, and even Slovenia, Croatia. So very central in the whole scheme of things. Not so great for airlift in recent years, but getting better. I mean, COVID erased all that, so hopefully we'll go back to some decent airlift once this is all over. And I made this little map so you can see what we'll be talking about. So Budapest is pretty much in the center of the country right here. I'm not going to really focus on Győr. There's a really cool abbey here, and it is good as a stopover drive from Vienna to Bratislava. But the places we'll talk about are places where your guests can do overnight outside of Budapest, most notably in the Lake Balaton area, down here in Pécs, and over in Tokaj. So for those of you that haven't worked with us before, we're very known for our local knowledge. Everything that I'm talking about here today is my own firsthand experience. We devote a lot of resources to get our staff to these destinations doing a deep dive so we know all of the ins and outs and how to plan it well for your guests, from picking the right guide to picking the right restaurants. Everything we do in Hungary is on an FIT basis, so we're customizing it for you and your guests. I have done trips as little as a half-day sightseeing because somebody's booked on a river cruise and they have an extra day in Budapest and they want to do something special, to multi-day, multi-city. So anything is possible here. No request is too little except transfers. Please don't ask me for transfers only, but everything else, I am happy to work with you to give your guests a good experience here. And we are so known for our guides. This one here in the top left, this is Julie. She's one of my favorite guides in Budapest. All of our guides are interviewed in person and over the phone with us. The phone, I think, is important because that's where if there's a strong accent, sometimes you pick it up more when you're speaking by phone than when you are in person. But we are quizzing the guides on their specialties and their education and just really trying to always pair the right guest to the right guide. So what we'll talk about today, some of the highlights of Budapest, as well as some of the highlights of the countryside. Budapest is super buzzy and vibrant. This is like, I guess we could call it like Austin or even Brooklyn. So it's got a really cool kind of edgy vibe, but it's surrounded by gorgeous architecture. Extensive Jewish history here. So if you have guests interested in Jewish heritage, we can do a lot with Jewish history, both in Budapest and in the countryside. And Budapest, as you would imagine, being the capital, does have the best hotels in the whole country. I'll go over quite a few of them with you shortly. Here, it's easy to fill 3 or 4 days. So if you have guests and they're first timers, please don't shortchange people. Try to do 3 nights here. That gives them 2 full days on the ground, and that's a good introduction into the city. There are some fun day trips we can do to really low-key and authentic spots, and I'll talk about that later. And Budapest has an amazing food scene. It is not the Eastern Europe of days past. They have Michelin star restaurants, they have food halls, they have a street food scene. It's really cool. And there's a really interesting nightlife element here too. In the countryside, there are some day trips that are possible, like I mentioned, but this is a great spot to budget in a couple of nights to go to one of the countryside destinations we'll talk about later if your guests have an interest in wine especially. Some spots are good for self-drive, and I'll show you that later if your guests are starting in Budapest and going to Croatia or Slovenia. There's a really good midway stopover point. Otherwise, Budapest to Zagreb's like a 6-hour drive, but there's a really nice point to stop over in the middle. There are wineries in all regions of this country in all varietals. So some areas are mostly white, some red, some even sparkling, and then there's also the sweet wines too. And Budapest itself and a lot of Hungary sits on thermal waters, and the spa scene is a big deal here. Keep in mind, while it can mean massage, spa here means taking the water. So some are single sex, so it's men or women on specific days, and some are co-ed, and some even have, believe it or not, rave parties at night. The countryside here also has a really nice selection of boutique hotels, and I'll show you a few of my favorites. So just to talk about a few of our extraordinary experiences, these are things that are really special that guests can't find on their own. And for pairing them with someone with the right interest, it'll really make a trip. This is a picture from when I was there in October. We had excursion to Tokai, which I'll talk about later, but the vintner drove us in his pickup truck up into the vineyards where they have this little hut, and this whole beautiful picnic spread was waiting for us. And the vintner sat and talked to us about his family history. He speaks English. His family's been in this area for hundreds of years. It's a really cool, authentic, personal experience that people can do. This is a ruin bar, and this is part of that kind of quirky, cool Budapest nightlife. There are, of course, cultural performances, and we can always get tickets. This is the birthplace of Liszt, but the ruin bar scene is really very unique to Budapest. These are in buildings that are ruins. Really, they're just unrenovated buildings, either from communist time or even before. And people have come in and made them these bars and nightclubs. Some serve food, and they're more like a cool, quirky restaurant. Some just serve drinks. What we do with this to make it less intimidating for guests is we send people with a guide to 3 hand-selected ruin bars where they're not going to be uncomfortable, and the guide kind of gives them the lay of the land and helps them with ordering. And that way they can have this experience without the potential discomfort of being a foreigner in a bar scene. We've even done this with teenagers because kids are allowed in until 8 o'clock. So if you have guests with teens and they want this kind of cool, edgy experience, we just start at 5 and do a 3-hour kind of 3 brew and bar visit. Not focused on alcohol, obviously, but mainly focused on the setting and what kinds of people go to them. And it's a really cool thing to do. And teens are hard to please. This is one thing that pleases them. For those who want something romantic and absolutely gorgeous, we do private boats on the Danube. This is one of the smaller ones. And it's actually, it looks so refined and classic, but it's actually a speedboat. So it can go as slow or as fast as the clients like. We can have canapes, we can have drinks. For larger groups, we have a slightly larger boat that we use, and this is all private. I love to do it just after sunset because you can see on the edges here how the lighting is. The city is lit and they light the monuments like Parliament and the castle and all the bridges, and it looks just gorgeous. It's a really nice way to cap off time in Budapest. This is the Doheny Synagogue, largest synagogue in Europe, and we do have a lot of guests that just do the Jewish quarter, but for those who are really interested, we do have a behind the scenes tour here where you go up behind where the rabbi would normally be. Your tour is led with our guide by either the rabbi or his daughter, both speak English, and you get kind of a behind the scenes look in contemporary Jewish life. This is also a really special thing. This is a half hour outside of Budapest, and there are these vineyards that are not any like giant production. They're mostly like passion projects. Somebody retired and they started a vineyard, and this is mostly white wines. The area is called Etiek, and it's really just like a slow food and wine area. It's perfect for like a long half day. If the timing works exactly right, they do these things called Etiek picnic, where it's like all the local food and wine producers in this big picnic scene. But normally we take guests out there. They go to one or two of the very local, very authentic vineyards. This is in one of the family's gardens where I had a wine tasting. They can taste wine, they can eat lunch. It's just completely different from the city center. This is a special experience I just did in October, and really it turned out to be a highlight for me in all of Hungary. These two ladies live in a tiny village just over an hour outside Budapest called Tard, T-A-R-D. And you can see their dresses. This is all hand embroidery in this special kind of folk motif called matio. And we take guests to this village. These ladies meet them. This is her homemade palinka that we had to drink at 9 a.m. for fear of offending her, and bread. And then we're taken into a workshop where someone has made this really cool social enterprise. A lot of these ladies are retired and they're on super limited like state incomes. And so this really creative person from Budapest has started this embroidery business. So they make souvenir products in this gorgeous embroidery, and it helps give them an extra income to supplement their small retirement. And when we take guests here, they're introduced to these ladies. The ladies show them how to do the embroidery. I failed, and the lady that I was working with took the embroidery right out of my hands and finished it for me because I guess I'm bad at that. I have other skills. But they take you on a little walking tour of their town, into their church, and there is a thatched roof home here that's sort of like an ethnographic museum, and they cook you lunch in the courtyard, so you're eating kind of like an open fire picnic style lunch. It is amazing. And again, because authentic experiences are really like key, it's not anymore, it's not just like, you know, going into a museum when it's closed to the public. Of course we can do that, but this is just so real and authentic, and you meet these ladies and you know you're helping them. So it's a really cool experience to do. So let's talk a little bit about hotels. And what I did here, because the hotels in Budapest are so unique, is I put two pictures of each hotel. Some hotels have really cool lobbies and architecture and kind of vanilla rooms, and then some hotels are the reverse. So I wanted you to see the difference. This is the lobby, so gorgeous, one of my favorite buildings in Budapest. It's the Four Seasons Gresham Palace. It's an Art Nouveau landmark. Even if your guests aren't on a Four Seasons budget, they can still come in here and maybe visit the cafe or the bar. It's stunning. For those of you that are virtuoso amenities are honored. For those of you that are Four Seasons preferred partner, those amenities are honored when you book through us as well. In all cases, when we're talking about Budapest, if you would rather book the hotels on your own, that's completely fine. So this is the lobby of the Four Seasons. You see it's like really, really, really super gorgeous. And then this is the room. a little bit more sedate, a little bit more subdued. What you do get here, if you pay enough, is a full-on view of the river and the castle. So this is the top hotel in the country, the highest price point. For those who want a five-star hotel but don't want to pay the Four Seasons rates, we'd love to work with the Kempinski Corvinas. This is a big hotel, over 300 rooms. So it's got this huge lobby, a really cool bar, a cool restaurant that kind of backs up to the pedestrian street, lots of facilities, big spa, even a Nobu restaurant here. The rooms are really nice. This is actually the first hotel I stayed in when I came to Budapest back in 2002, and they had these horrible like golden black striped bedspreads. It was awful, but they've renovated all the rooms. They look fantastic. A lot of them have the views. I don't know if you can see out this window. That's one of those giant Ferris wheels that's in the park outside the hotel. This is also Virtuoso and Signature. So if you're booking through us, amenities are honored. There is a tiny hotel, 50 rooms, for someone who likes a boutique hotel called the Aria. This is a picture of their rooftop bar. They're very unique. Only a couple of hotels have this. They sit about 3 blocks or so back from the Danube off of a pedestrian street. This right here is St. Stephen's Cathedral. So you could walk to the Danube in about 5 or 6 minutes. The rooftop bar here is a highlight. Sometimes they do yoga on the roof. It's super cool. This is a boutique hotel with a music focus. So there are lots of music themed things happening. They have a music concierge. Food here is outstanding. Rooms are for people who like color. They are either this lilac color, and I love purple, but this is a lot of purple, or they're turquoise. So guests have to be prepared for rooms with a lot of color, but you can see the size is great, the layout is good. They're just colorful. They do have, for those who are traveling with families, some really nice connecting room suite options at a way lower price point than the Four Seasons, just as an FYI. Aria is also part of Virtuoso and Signature. So again, amenities carry through if we're booking it. This is a hotel not part of Virtuoso or Signature yet because they just opened in 2018. This is part of Hyatt's new Unbound collection. So to be sort of like Marriott Autograph, it's called Parisi Udvar. I stayed here in October of last year. Look at this lobby. This is the lobby. And the cool thing about it is everybody that comes up has their heads up in the air because the ceiling's just so gorgeous and everybody's trying to get these pictures. This used to be a shopping passage and they took it over and spent 5 years renovating it. So this is the lobby, the main restaurant and the cafe all look like this, and the rooms look like this. So beautiful rooms, but just all white and cream and really none of that like super ornate kind of Art Nouveau aspect like the lobby has. They tell me they're going to join Virtuoso, but I know they're not in there yet. This is a hotel that was supposed to open in October, and I just talked to them today, and they're actually delaying the opening until, I believe, March at this point. This is part of Marriott Luxury Collection, and it is literally across the street from the Hyatt. It is a mirror image building, so the building is exactly the same, but look at the difference in the lobby. It's called the Mathilde Palace, and they took the not quite ornate approach to the public rooms, but very much kept the Art Deco features. And their rooms are more colorful and with more like Art Nouveau and Art Deco aspects. So I love the rooms. Hopefully we'll be able to stay there when it opens in the spring. It's, again, this one, like the Hyatt, relatively small. I believe they're both around 110 rooms. Lots of suite options. And this one, the Mathilde Palace, will have a rooftop bar as well. At the Hyatt, they made the area that has the rooftop into like a 2-bedroom residence. So it's pretty cool. So in the countryside, there are very good hotels, nothing super luxurious, but really comfortable. In the Tokai region, this is the Andrashi Residence. I just stayed there in October. Beautiful little hotel, fantastic spa. Rooms are fine. I mean, for a countryside hotel, this is really nice. Another one that I loved when it was in the Lake Balaton area. For me, the only downside of this hotel is it's not right on the lake. This is above the vineyards and the hills above the lake, and it looks like a Tuscan villa just dropped in the middle of Hungary. Super sharp, energetic staff. They've hosted a lot of Hollywood dignitaries. I don't know if you know, but a lot of Hollywood films are filmed in Hungary. Rooms also look Tuscan, so really nice countryside hotel. This is also on the way for self-drive guests to Slovenia or Croatia. This is about 2 hours outside of Budapest, just as an aside. For those guests going to Pécs, and we'll talk about what Pécs has a little bit later, this is a great little boutique hotel right in the center of the city. Very nice, elegant, and simple. And the great thing about these countryside hotels, like these rooms are like $100 a night. So you get a really nice room, some countryside experience, and the prices are very reasonable. Here's one of my favorite. It's called Herdelendy. It's a castle. They are pretty unique. They open for events, and then they will open to sell rooms as a hotel on specific times of the year. But if you book 6 rooms, you can book it out. So if you want people to have like a countryside break, they have a riding stables here, they have fishing, they have multiple pools, they have golf, they have a shooting range, and they even have an airstrip. 6 rooms will get you full services at this castle all to yourself. And sometimes, you know, castles look good on the outside and not on the inside. This is what the rooms look like. Super fantastic, very warm staff. English is widely spoken. It's just one of these really like hidden things in the countryside. This is only 31 miles from the Lake Balaton area, but our drive there took about an hour. So it's on little country roads. It's again a good spot if you have people going from Budapest to Slovenia or Croatia. It's a great stopover to give like a really interesting countryside experience. So let's talk a little bit about the different regions. Tokaj is a place where I didn't send that many people before because I feel like Tokaj wine, which is that super sweet dessert wine, people either love it or they hate it. And it's hard to tell someone, you know, go to a side trip to the Tokaj region, and if you hate dessert wines, oh well. But it's come a long way. Vineyards obviously play a huge role here, but also Jewish heritage, because one of the towns near Tokaj is called Mad, and there is some really interesting Jewish sites here, a restored synagogue and an information center. They host a lot of Jewish kind of genealogy people here and Jewish groups. They have a beautiful Jewish cemetery that sits above the town. You can see the vineyards in the background. So for those who don't love dessert wines, this one here is called Ferment. This is a new one. They started making a new varietal several years ago for people who don't just want Tokaj, because I guess they figured they couldn't make a living just on dessert wines. This is a dry white, very tasty and very drinkable. So for those who want a white wine or dessert wine experience, this region is absolutely wonderful. It's all little villages and small scale vintners. I went to one that was run by a woman, which is pretty unique. This is run by a family that's been in winemaking for hundreds of years. They're the people that did the picnic for us. I mean, it's really special and all very small scale. This is a really cool little village in the Tokaj region called Hergechuk, and it is actually Schwabian, which is German, a historic village, and German is still spoken by the families that live here. And it looks like a little hobbit village. These are very little tiny um, uh, wine cellars that go into the hill. So we went into one, and you go down and there are the wine barrels, and then there are tasting rooms, all kind of underground, but it's a really cool experience. Again, focusing on Tokaj, focusing on ferment and all white wines, but a really cool local authentic experience. These are not like big exports. So heading in the complete opposite direction, because Tokaj, if you remember back at the map, was towards the east, towards Ukraine. Lake Balaton is towards the west, so towards Slovenia and Hungary. This is a huge vacation area for a lot of people in Hungary. The lake is gigantic, and there are different towns around the lake, and we tend to focus on a few particular sites. This is the area where the Heron factory is. For those that don't know, this is this huge um, a hugely traditional porcelain factory. This web painting that you see here is what it's known for. If you ever watch anything where the Queen of England is talking, she has herons behind her. And we can do a visit to the factory if you just want to buy, or if your guests just want to buy porcelain from the factory. They don't just sell ornamental pieces like this, they sell plates and platters and vases. But also, if guests want something hands-on, we can take them on a factory tour so they can see the ladies that are making these and then make their own. Lake Balaton is also great for water activities. So if guests wanted to go to Lake Balaton, even if they're not staying there, because we do sometimes have guests go for a day trip and take a private boat out for a little while, this is absolutely popular or absolutely possible. And normally when we're doing it as a day trip, we make sure to include this beautiful little town of Tihany. It has an ancient monastery here and castle, and it's just gorgeous to walk through. And as you can see, it kind of just sits above the lake. Balaton is also known for wine tasting, and here you have white, but you also start to get more reds. So again, these are all pretty small scale productions, and we can arrange private tasting or just meals in places that are tied to a particular winery. So Pécs is a place I visited for the first time last year, and I wasn't quite sure what to make of it, but this town, I mean, look, it's got palm trees. It's in the southern part of Hungary, and beautiful little town, very walkable. Roman ruins here, actually, and a beautiful synagogue and a church. And we actually met a fantastic guide there who was so lively and fun. And anytime we went in someplace, like we went into a church, so she sang for us so we could hear the acoustics. We went into the synagogue, she sang a Jewish song for us so we could hear the acoustics. Really cool. Sometimes you get in the countryside, the guide quality drops off, but not here. So basing in Pécs, you have access to another kind of set of wine areas. This is red wine area. One is called Villani, and this is, you don't see it over here, but this is the main street of town, and this is winemaker after winemaker after winemaker, and you can just go here with your guide and walk from winemaker to winemaker and sample the whole way. Great food in this area as well. And I really love this little village nearby called Pokonia. And this is kind of like a one street village of winemakers, but also the forest outside the town is where they have truffle hunting. So who knew Hungary had truffles? But they do. And we can do truffle hunting. There's also a bike trail nearby. So again, it's a completely like off the radar kind of spot that's not going to be full of American tourists, and that's great for wine and food. So Hungary itself doesn't have a lot of art museums, but they do have a lot of art galleries. It's very known in Budapest for contemporary art galleries, so we can arrange specific sightseeing around that. I also love the architecture in Budapest because there's so much Art Nouveau, and between like the New York Cafe and some of the buildings, we could do a whole tour based on the architecture here. Contemporary history plays a big role in Hungary, both from the 1956 uprising to its World War II history, and even farther back as part of the invading Huns from Asia. So this is a scene I shot in one of my favorite contemporary history museums called Terror House. It's in the building where the secret police were during communist times, and it is a look at communist rule via propaganda. So really interesting visit that usually generates some very interesting dialogue between the guests and the guide, because the guides are always willing to talk about their lives and their families' lives, and a lot of them have had some really interesting history during communist times. So unfortunate name, Terror House, but a really interesting and kind of must-visit museum in Budapest. So culinary travel, Hungary is amazing for food. As I mentioned before, Budapest itself has Michelin star dining. I got this beautiful lunch charcuterie plate with fried zucchini, which was amazing, in the middle of the countryside in a tiny little town called Eger. And this is what they brought to our table for lunch. It's like perfect, not heavy, and really interesting. And all of the meat was from local producers, and the cheese, and really for someone who's looking for an interesting culinary um, aspect to their trip, Hungary can really do it. And that is as simple as a food walking tour in Budapest, cooking lesson, or exploring food outside the city. We can talk, and all of this can be arranged. I do want to mention that Budapest often comes up in our self-drive programs, often as a beginning or an end, because a lot of people either combine Budapest, countryside Vienna, or Budapest, countryside Prague. And just as a recap with our self-drive, we work with you to map out the entire day-by-day itinerary for the guests. Oftentimes, self-drive trips use less guide services than others, but we have guides strategically where they make sense. We handle all of the countryside hotels, and either we can book the car or you can book the car. Before your guests depart the US, they get a fully pre-programmed Garmin GPS, and that is sent as part of the final document. So literally all they have to do is plug and play. I can tell you that I'm very happy when I go to destinations that I've been over and over again, because I feel like I've got please and I've got thank you, and I can read some basic words in the languages, and I understand the Cyrillic alphabet. Hungary, all bets are off. I've got cheers, egészségedre, and thank you, köszönöm, and that's it. It's a very difficult language. I can't imagine getting in a rental car and having to program some of these names with all the vowels and crazy combinations of consonants, and having that pre-programmed Garmin just takes all the stress off of that. No super highways here. It's mostly countryside driving, so stress-free. Families do really well in Budapest and in the Hungarian countryside. Biking in Budapest, I think, is a death wish for most people, but just outside the city, this is around Lake Balaton, but also in Santander, which is about a half-hour away. We can do biking. There are a lot of hands-on things we can do with guests, from bonbon making. Budapest is known for marzipan, and cooking, and kids often, we like to involve them in the food tours. Lots of things we can do for families here. So I mentioned Jewish heritage. This is an outside picture of the synagogue. We do have people on the ground that can do genealogy if the guests need it for a fee. Most of the guests honestly come to us already knowing their family history and want to visit sites tied into that. Actually, our manager in Budapest is Jewish. A lot of the guides we use are Jewish or of Jewish heritage. Our manager on the ground, her husband's father is a rabbi. They're very tied into the Jewish heritage travel market. They can even do bar mitzvahs for our guests. I mean, it's anything with Jewish heritage can be done here, and done relatively painlessly. This is a picture at Fisherman's Bastion above Budapest. My colleague Lori and I, we are handling just about everything with Central Europe. So we're at your service for questions or helping plan itineraries. And this is our whole team. We took everyone this past year to Poland in December, who knew the pandemic would hit. But this is all of us in the city center of Krakow. And that's it. So that's Hungary. A lot to see and do. It just depends on the interests of your guests.